Pennsylvania Avenue. Almost every American knows this as its coined term America's Main Street because it runs directly between the White House and the U.S. Capitol building. Most people, when they hear Pennsylvania Avenue, think of the tree-lined streets lined with monuments, museums, and other important buildings in Washington, D.C. But what most Americans don't know is what happens once Pennsylvania Avenue leaves Washington, D.C. In fact, it continues 65 miles as Maryland Route 4. Pennsylvania Avenue actually used to be signed as DC Route 4 until a large majority of the DC routes were discontinued. Maryland Route 4 begins from the District Maryland state line. It continues through the suburbs of Suitland and Forestville, meets the Beltway. From there, it upgrades to a limited access highway, passing through the Washington, D.C. exurbs to the Prince George's County seat of Upper Marlboro, where it crosses the Patuxent River, which is very narrow at that point, onto the Calvert County Peninsula, dives due south with an intersection with Maryland Route 260 providing access to Chesapeake Beach, downgrading in Dunkirk to a stoplighted highway before meeting Maryland Route 2 in the longest state highway concurrency in Maryland, continues to the Calvert County seat of Prince Frederick, continuing all the way down to Solomons, where Route 4 splits from Route 2. Route 4 now crosses the now very large Patuxent River on the Thomas Johnson Bridge into St. Mary's County, where it intersects with Maryland Route 235, before downgrading to a two-lane highway to a point just south of Leonardtown on Maryland Route 5. Counting Leonardtown, 3 county seats in Maryland are connected with Washington, D.C. Now, I do want to briefly talk about Maryland Route 5 because Route 4 and Route 5 are sort of in a symbiotic relationship. Both routes serve southern Maryland. Both routes originate in Washington, D.C. and move southeast. And it used to be that DC 5 began from DC 4 at Pennsylvania Avenue, and currently Maryland Route 4 ends at Maryland Route 5. So Route 4 begins Route 5 and Route 5 ends Route 4. We'll be starting out on the upland coastal plain. Once we cross under the Calvert County Peninsula, we'll be on the knobby upland coastal zone, which does not resemble a plain at all, as you'll see in the video. And then once we cross back to St. Mary's County, we will re-enter the upland coastal plain. Towards the northern end of the drive, we'll be in the northern Atlantic coastal plain hardwood forest, but we will start to see a transition to the southeastern mixed forests around the location of Prince Frederick. Now watch this drive. We're heading southbound on 15th Street. The U.S. Treasury Building and the White House are to our right. At this point, we turn left onto Pennsylvania Avenue, which will take us to Route 5 in approximately 70 miles. To show how the transition happens, we're going to do all of Pennsylvania Avenue in D.C. at 10x. The U.S. Capitol building is now visible ahead. We're going to cross the Metrorail blue, orange, and silver lines, which are about 40 feet beneath us, and then the green and yellow lines, which are also about 40 feet beneath us. This is close to the Capitol as you can get on Pennsylvania Avenue, so we switch over to Constitution to climb Capitol Hill. We'll complete the square around the Capitol by turning southbound on 1st Street above the Amtrak VRE tunnel. We'll take a left on Independence, and a slight right brings us onto Pennsylvania Avenue southeast. At Seward Square, 40 feet beneath us, the blue, orange, and silver lines curve in from the right and run underneath of us. Blue, orange, and silver lines curve off to the left, and we cross the John Philip Sousa Bridge over the Anacostia River. We pass underneath DC 295, and note we are still in Washington, D.C. We're going through the Anacostia neighborhood. We've now reached Branch Avenue. Turn right and it becomes Maryland Route 5. This is the last neighborhood in Washington, D.C., Fort Davis Park. We're now sitting at a stoplight on Southern Avenue. This is the border of Washington, D.C. and Maryland. Cross the intersection, and now we've entered Maryland Route 4. It's very silent initially. There's no real indication that you're on a Maryland highway other than the instant upgrade from a city street. Route 4 begins as a two-lane divided avenue. Now get ready for a time change, because that sun that's beating down hard on the car caused the camera to overheat, and so I had to come back on a different day. In fact, this is the day the Route 5 video was recorded, so look for the sky to look very similar in that video. The solution was blasting the car's defroster so that the camera would be cooled by the moving air. Now you might have noticed a similar gap earlier in the time-lapse segment. That began around 11th Street Southeast and persisted until the John Philip Sousa Bridge. Almost 2 miles into Route 4, and only here do we finally see our first Route 4 highway sign. Okay, get ready to go back in time. We're returning to the original video on the original day. Now this is the moment I got smart and turned up the defroster. Maryland Route 458, Silver Hill Road, represents an important ring connector between Central Avenue, which is the extension of East Capitol Street, Maryland 214, Route 4, the Suitland Parkway, and Route 5. this is something that's pretty uncommon in Maryland, and the circumstances make it unique. There is a stoplight that is dedicated to a pedestrian crosswalk. However, there's no direct access to the left or the right. It's not a major trail in any way. It's just a simple location for you to switch sides from one side of the highway to another. Both sidewalks continue on both sides, and there are stoplights on either side of this to cross at. So I can't exactly see the reason why they installed one here. The signs indicate we are approaching the only interstate highway that Maryland Route 4 crosses. It is Interstate 495, the Capital Beltway, which also carries Interstate 95 on this side of the District of Columbia. At the interchange with Interstate 95 and Interstate 495. At this location, Maryland Route 4 upgrades to what I'll call a semi-freeway, which is almost a freeway aside from a few lights, and the highway speed limit increases to 55. Understanding is that they are currently upgrading this section of Maryland Route 4 to limited access highway. They've already done it with 2 of the intersections in this segment. This, I believe, is one of those intersections where they've already started the process. This is Maryland Route 337, which carries Allentown Road, but also very important, it also branches into the Suitland Parkway, which runs basically controlled access all the way to I-295 in DC. You could then use the Southeast Freeway, I-695, and the Southwest Freeway, I-395, to reach Northern Virginia. Past that stoplight, we are now limited access all the way to Dunkirk. this particular part of the DC Metro is quite rare. We are only 11 miles from the U.S. Capitol building, but there are significant swaths of undeveloped land here that's not protected, and it's starting to be developed. But it is amazing that in 2025 that we're already hitting exurbs. To give you some context, if you went eastward, pretty much Bowie is about where the exurbs start after that, which is about 17 miles out. If you go northeast, you really don't have a exurb section because then you hit the Baltimore Metro. If you go north into Montgomery County, this happens around Damascus and Germantown, which is 27 miles out. If you go northwest, you have to go all the way to Leesburg, which is 35 miles. And if you go due west, Haymarket, also 35 miles. And if you go south, about Triangle, I should say southwest, because technically we're going south as well, 30 miles. And if you go between south and southeast, Waldorf at about 22 miles. right is the Prince George's County Showplace Arena, which originated as the Equestrian Center, which had a horse racing track. Large parts of that horse racing track no longer exist, but they do still have horse shows and a number of other venues like concerts and wrestling matches, shows and small conventions and whatnot. We're going through Upper Marlboro currently, and as the sign indicates ahead, we're coming up to a significant juncture, US 301, which can take you to US Route 50, Baltimore, the Eastern Shore, or if you turn south, it will eventually join up with Route 5 to run the peninsula between the Patuxent and Potomac rivers before crossing the Harry Nice Bridge onto the northern neck of Virginia. We'll stay southbound on Maryland Route 4, which will take us to the western shore, the peninsula between the Patuxent River and the Chesapeake Bay. Maryland defines several ecoregions in that area. The western shore, which pretty much represents the Calvert County Peninsula. The Patuxent Corridor, which represents the Route 5 corridor close to the west bank of the Patuxent River, and the Potomac Corridor, which is served by the southern portion of US 301 South. An alternate way to get via Route 301 to Route 4 is to take Old Marlboro Pike, which is coming in from the right. And this large view in front of us is the valley of the Patuxent River. At this location, the Patuxent River has just gone tidal, which means that you could technically bring a boat in from the bay, but it is still very narrow here. Crossing the Patuxent River. And now compare that length with the length of the Thomas Johnson Bridge, which will be towards the end of the video, and you'll get a feel for how much the river grows in that distance. We've now entered Anne Arundel County. This bridge coming up is Maryland Route 408. 408 was the original Route 4, which continues due east to Harwood, the present site of a traffic circle with Maryland Route 2. And that used to be the end of Maryland Route 4 until the mid-1960s, when the Southern Maryland Boulevard, today known as Stephanie Roper Highway, which is the segment that we are on right now, was constructed, and Maryland Route 4 was routed through Dunkirk, ultimately to meet up with Route 2 on what used to be Maryland 416. This section through here I call the Speedway because it's absolutely straight and open, and I've seen plenty of drivers doing upwards of 90 and 100 miles per hour through this segment. This next exit coming up is for Maryland Route 258 and 259, which provide access to the Bayside community of Deal, as as well as another connector route to Lothian, where Maryland Route 2 is. And this yellow sign is the most useless sign I've ever seen, warning that the freeway ends. But that's only because there is very light traffic farm roads crossing the highway. But there's no stoplights and there's no blinking lights on this section either. Furthermore, there's an additional exit coming up. So I don't really find that sign useful in any way whatsoever. Now, since Maryland 258, 4 is now running almost due south, and in this section, the northbound lanes are very narrow. There's no shoulder. And a common issue that I see a lot of times is folks that are northbound on 4 will encounter the exit to 258, and interestingly enough, to stay on 4, you actually have to keep left, and they'll actually go straight. And the only evidence that you have that you're not on 4 anymore is the left lane is gone. So I've seen that happen a number of times where drivers will realize at the last second and cut back. We're now descending towards Lyons Creek, and the median narrows at this point again. This used to be a stoplight for Maryland Route 260, but in around 2000 this became a exit ramp. So Maryland Route 260 continues approximately 8 miles past Route 2 all the way to the shore at Chesapeake Beach. And having crossed Lyons Creek, we've now entered Calvert County, which will significantly change the look of the highway over the next few minutes. It should be noted that this county is notorious for going after speeders. Cops will sit in hidden locations, they'll pull drivers that are doing 10 over, and they'll pull drivers that are doing 10 over when it's the speed of the traffic. Dunkirk Town Center, the limited access highway of Route 4 truly ends with our first stoplight. From here to the end of the highway, there will be stoplights. heading south out of Dunkirk, Route 4 gets amazingly hilly. We're coming up to Hall Creek, and this next hill, it's very hard to say that we're on a coastal plain. In fact, the Maryland Geological Survey calls this knobby upland that stands in stark contrast to its surroundings. In general, with Maryland Route 4 in Calvert County, when they widened the highway, they simply kept one two-lane section of Maryland Route 416, or Maryland Route 2 when we get further south, and then simply created another segment beside it. You can tell which segment was the original one for generally two reasons. One, utility poles, and two, higher absolute elevation swings. The older highway will have the higher highs and the lower lows. To this fantastic line of hills at Skinner's Turn Road, you can tell very clearly that the left side of the highway was the original. The right side is the new. And this is a fun segment to drive as long as you have somebody in front of you who understands how to work a hill. Coming in from the left up ahead is Maryland Route 2. Route 2 is the longest state highway in Maryland, and it joins Route 4 right here for the longest state highway concurrency in Maryland and second longest concurrency in Maryland, period. We are now overlapping with my Maryland Route 2 video, and will overlap all the way to the southern tip of Calvert County, splitting only to cross the Patuxent River. generally don't stop the video to interrupt it, but this is very important. You see this guy right here? That's a speed camera. The one saving grace is it's at the top of a hill, but the Calverton School is to our left, which is why it's there. At the bottom of this valley is Hunting Creek, and to the left is Maryland 263 Plum Point Road, which actually forms an alternative to Maryland 2 and 4 if you connect it with Maryland 260 in the north, and then Maryland 261 Bayfront Road connecting the two. I might actually do a video for Maryland Route 261, because if you've been surprised by the amount of hills on this highway on the coastal plain, you haven't seen anything until you've seen 261. Frederick, which is the county seat of Calvert County. And this town is growing very fast. About 25 years ago, this town had 3 lights: Stockley Road, Dares Beach Road, and Halloween Point Road. Right now, we're up to 7. And if you take a look at my Maryland Route 2 video, you will not see the stoplight that we're coming up to, which is brand new. When this one comes online, we'll be up to 8, which is an increase of almost 3-fold. is Maryland Route 231 Hallowing Point Road, which represents a cross corridor between the Route 5 and the Route 4 corridor. As we discussed on the map at the very beginning of this video, the two routes serve a roughly northwest to southeast alignment in southern Maryland, and they're connected in the middle by a bridge across the Patuxent River of Maryland Route 231, and it is around this location that the Patuxent starts to get big. This is our last light in the downtown area of Prince Frederick. There'll be one more light that will come up to but that is still a ways off. This is around the area that I start to notice the first forest changes between the northern hardwoods and southeastern mixed. For example, the Battle Creek Cypress Swamp is to the right, following Maryland Route 506. It is one of the northernmost bald cypress stands in the United States. To the right is Brooms Island Road. You can go off to the right to Brooms Island, and probably 15% of the traffic does that actually. Or you can go straight on Solomon's Island Road and go to Solomon's Island, or like what we're going to do, cross the Patuxent into St. Mary's County. left is Flag Ponds Park. The southern third of Calvert County is mostly empty, aside from Lusby and Solomon's Island. But there are some really great parks along the bay, including the Chestnut Land Trust trails, Flag Ponds Park, which is in some interesting areas called flag ponds, which are small ponds that form in the tidal regions of the Chesapeake and lowlands, sort of like tide pools a little bit. And then further south is Calvert Cliffs State Park. And speaking of Calvert Cliffs, this is the Calvert Cliffs Nuclear Power Plant, which currently has 2 reactors. They've been talking about getting 2 more for the longest time. And who knows, it might happen, it might not happen. But right now, Maryland is really hurting for energy generation. And it's possible that it might not be, it might be needed because of the huge energy deficit. now entering Solomon's and nearing the end of the Maryland 2 and Maryland 4 concurrency. Now, unlike the Maryland Route 2 video, instead of exiting the highway onto the island to follow Maryland Route 2, we instead will follow Maryland Route 4 up and over the bridge that's just now coming up over the horizon slightly to the left. That is the Governor Thomas Johnson Bridge over the Patuxent River, which is now about a mile wide. We're moving into the left lane now to prepare for what comes ahead. And don't let that highway sign fool you. Even though it says Maryland Route 4, it is currently Maryland 2 and 4, as was demonstrated in the Maryland Route 2 video. Coming up here is the intersection for Maryland Route 2, for the left. This is where the split happens. The right lane becomes a turn lane for the marina underneath the Thomas Johnson Bridge, and it is at this location that the 4-lane divided highway of Maryland Route 4 disappears, and we are now to a 2-lane highway from here to the remainder of the Route 4. We're now entering the abutment to the Thomas Johnson Bridge, which has 130 feet vertical clearance. It's one of the scariest bridges that I've ever seen for bridge anxiety. It goes up about 150 feet to the apex. The river underneath is about 130 feet deep, and it just so turns out that it's actually one of the deepest rivers on the East Coast. And it's actually the deepest spot in the Chesapeake Bay area that isn't within the Chesapeake Bay itself. But it's steeper than it looks. It's obviously, as you can see, it's 2 lanes and no shoulders, and it's a huge choke point when cars get stuck on the bridge. And again, this is the same river that we crossed in Waysons Corner about 23.5 minutes into the video. At this first pull, we reach the apex of the bridge, approximately 150 feet above the water, and begin descending towards St. Mary's County. We've now exited Calvert County. To give you an idea of how high this bridge is, from the surface of the water you cannot see the eastern shore. When you climb this bridge, it actually reveals the eastern shore because your horizon viewing distance increases that much. But unfortunately that can't be seen on video because we're obviously facing forward and we need to face to the left. We're now crossing Patuxent Beach right now, which is kind of a almost island, but more of a flag-shaped peninsula, and this is Town Creek, which is surprisingly clear today. This is an inlet of the Patuxent River. We're now in mainland St. Mary's County. coming up to the spine road of St. Mary's County, Maryland 235, 3-notch road. This is the southernmost 4-lane divided highway in southern Maryland. Turn left or southeast and you'll reach the Patuxent River Naval Air Station in about 4 miles. And after that, it too will drop to a 2-lane highway. Turn right and eventually it will join up with Maryland Route 5 and take you back to Washington, D.C. Instead, we're going to continue south along St. Andrew's Church Road to the final terminus of Route 4 in Leonardtown. Now, despite the fact that the highway sign tells you that this is Maryland 4 South, around the location of Lusby, we began a westward turn, and at this spot we are going almost due west. And we will continue this west-southwesterly direction until we reach the end. On Maryland Route 4, a general rule can be stated that as one goes south on the highway, the less traffic that will be seen. There's two notable exceptions to this rule. One is at the junction between 2 and 4, which 2 brings on a bunch of traffic to Route 4. The other major exception is just south of the Calvert Cliffs nuclear power plant, which brings a number of commuting workers between there and the Naval Air Station. Other than that, that rule holds. And this is it. We're now seeing signs for the Potomac Corridor and Route 5. Maryland Route 4 ends in a T intersection with Maryland Route 5, which originated from Branch Avenue, which we saw approximately an hour and a half ago. To give you an idea of how close we are to the Potomac River, from this location, I was actually able to smell, with my windows rolled up, the salt marsh of Breton Bay, which is an inlet from the Potomac River. And if you look on the left, you can actually see the tree line dropping where that swamp is. If you turn right on Maryland Route 5, that'll bring you back to Washington, D.C. If you turn left, that'll bring you south all the way to Point Lookout, which we will see in the next video. We are now southbound on Maryland Route 5 and have approximately 27 miles to go to the very tip of Point Lookout. Check out my next video on Route 5 to continue this journey and to see how we got here. And if you liked this video, please like it on YouTube and please subscribe to my channel. I'm trying to grow it. Thank you all for joining me. This has been Dr. Aeronautics on Maryland Route 4. And I will see you all next time.